When we did this survey, 43% of the people surveyed felt that their training was either below average or poor. That is not good. And what it came out to is basically the training is it's way too narrow. So it's, to all intents and purposes, you're going to get negotiation training. You might get something else. It's too weighted on the people in the early part of their career, but of course, as you progress up through your career, there's so many more things that you've got to learn, and there's massive gaps. So there's gaps in things like being trained in cost modeling, and that's something I end up training a lot. Being trained in supply security, it's not automatic. You know how to do it. Someone's got to show you how to go and secure supply, and some of it can get quite quite nuanced. Sustainable procurement. Who's training how to do sustainable procurement? Who's training in systems? It's not just we have a new MRP system, here's how to use it. It's okay, what's all the procurement systems out there? What's the architecture that we need? How do we get ourselves set up for the future?
Thanks so much for joining another edition of The Never-Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Joining me today, and while I'm in an unusual spot, joining me today is Simon Frost. And Simon is the founder of Frost Procurement Adventures. Simon, thank you so much for joining us.
Really great to be here.
I'd love to hear more about how did you get into procurement? Was it kind of like one of those memes where the door just kind of closed on you and you suddenly found yourself in a garage in procurement?
Great question. I'm one of these classic people who didn't intend to end up in procurement. I think that's probably the same for quite a few people. In fact, I'm a mechanical and manufacturing engineer by training, and I joined an American company in year 2000, Mars Confectionery, and I thought I'd be spending most of my life doing big engineering projects, but that's not how it worked out. On the graduate training scheme, they rotated me into procurement back in 2003, and I'll be very honest to say it's quite embarrassing. I barely knew what the word meant. Because it just wasn't marketed properly. But then after a couple of weeks, I kind of really got the hang of what it was all about. And I went, hang on a minute, this is a really exciting place to be. And I just got this feeling that it was going to be an area which was going to have its day at some point. So I placed my entire career bet on that. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Now, I'll confess to being slightly distracted. This sounds like a confectionery company. Now, in my past, as I'll say, as an 8-year-old Sean, my dream job was to be the quality assurance engineer on the Oreo factory. Was there any parallel here for you, Simon?
I'm not going to lie, it was a great first job. So my first role, in fact, just before I did the engineering, my second placement is I was a shift manager making minstrels and M&Ms and then massive vats of sweeties. And I sort of just that temptation for to dive in. I didn't, I'll be honest, but yeah, it was a great place to go. And in those days, we were allowed to, if you like, eat sweeties off the line. I'm sure things have changed since then. But yeah, really great first job.
Yeah, you got to do the ad hoc random quality controls. That's brilliant.
That's it. Very important to check the quality.
And I'd love to ask a little bit more about what do you do these days? Because I know that you help companies with procurement, with sustainability. But it's not necessarily easy to understand that at a first glance. How do you describe that if you're in an elevator with somebody?
So in fact, what happened without every twist and turn of my career, I had 15 years in industry, so 6 years with Mars. I then set up the procurement team for an English company called Innocent Smoothies. You don't have them in North America, but they make fruit smoothie drinks, and they flew and became part of the Coca-Cola company. And then I was farming fruit in East Africa, mango and banana. And really that set the course for my career. I love food and I love procurement, and I put those two things together. So 10 years ago, I set my business up, and I specialised just in food, drink and pet care. You might say, what's the pet care piece? Because ultimately, whether we're, if you like, feeding a human or feeding a pet, in fact, a lot of the suppliers, supply chains and kind of principles are the same.
Yeah. Especially when you're getting the good quality pet food that I know our dog enjoys.
This is it. What sort of pet food do you feed your dog, by the way? A dry, or wet, or what do you do?
It's a combination of some of the leftovers from the kitchen,
Okay.
but also there's a dry kibble that's human grade food.
Yeah.
And I think there's much that I had a chance to read about how important the ingredients are, and especially in animal lifespan.
That's it. And actually, just before coming back to the question you asked, there is, I mean, literally the materials and supplies can be the same. So I was out in Asia a couple of times over the summer, and I could be walking into a factory doing, for example, human grade tuna, and it's the very same tuna that will go into a cat food. Equally, the cereals that go into the dry kibble that you feed your, is it so a dog or
We
cat
have a
you have?
dog.
Have a dog, yeah. So, if it's a dry kibble, it might have a percentage of cereals in there, same cereals as that we'd have in our own diets.
Could have come out a box on the shelf and pour a little milk over it, and away we go.
There we go. Same thing. Would you like me to come back to that question you asked about kind of what I do?
Yeah, please, Simon. Obviously, the career that you've had fascinates me, not just because you got to play a little bit of what I had always imagined to
Mm.
be one of my favorite jobs that I wanted to do growing up
Yeah,
is quality assurance,
yeah,
even
yeah.
if it's spot checks. You're helping with the sustainability, with the quality, with the timeliness, with one of the world's most challenging problems and the
Mm.
supply chain of food that
Mm.
gets, I mean, there's still a significant amount of waste on its way to the store, let alone to the table. And so this is where
Mm.
I love the focus of your career,
Mm.
of your life. And it is solving what to me is one of those massive problems in the world. I'm fascinated. Please do continue.
Mm. Oh, you're very kind. And look, it sounds cheesy, but I truly count myself one of the luckiest people in the world to do the job I do. I absolutely love it. If I
Yeah.
give some examples of the sort of things I do, so if you take, for example, supply security, go back, if you like, 20, 30 years ago, it's not that crops weren't failing then, they would have been. But now, with Mother Nature and all the geopolitical challenges that exist, it is definitely not a given that we get what we thought kind of we were trying to buy. And so I could have, for example, client A. So client A literally called me up. It was like a distressed purchase the day that COVID kicked in and supply chains just froze and all the Chinese ports froze, etc. They picked up the phone and said, "You've got a massive challenge. As a big business, we're just too bureaucratic to navigate our way through it, and we need a third party to help lead us through that." And I'm like, "What, me?" And they were like, "Yeah, we think you can do it." And so I did it, and it was like dream shot, helping this company get through the whole COVID challenge. Another
Love
example
it.
is, so it's a climate related one, is that I've got a client who was sourcing materials out of Europe, and there were little alarm bells that material they were buying was getting challenging, both from a cost and supply point of view, because there were droughts in that country. And they couldn't work out how to secure supply. And so I did a complete piece of work globally to work out what we do in terms of where we source from, what the specifications would be, and how to get it. And we made a complete pivot to South America. So they can be big structural things like that. I do a lot of work on what's called cost modeling. So if you go back in time again, sort of 20, 30 years ago, I would picture this fictitious person in my mind, but the buyer sort of 30 years ago, slam the hand on the table and go, "It's too expensive." Those times have changed is that we cannot and should not behave like that. We have to be much cuter of like
Yeah.
how we get good value from a product. And so if you take an item, say it's $1,000 a ton as the price, well, the question is, what should it cost? And what I do is I build up all the
Yes.
costs from bottom up in real detail and go, well, actually, that product should only cost 930 per ton. And often people say to me, is that not just taking out a huge amount of profit from the supply? Look, there are times when a supplier might be choosing too much. But what's the lovely examples is when you're much cuter than that and you go, hang on a minute, we're over-specing that material, we're using grade A, we only need grade B. There's a different processing method, we can reduce waste, we can source from a different region, etc. And that's when we're kind of doing it really well. And if I might just continue and then hand back to you. So there's this supply security piece, there's a cost piece. There's quite a lot on things like NPD and innovation, so how we help businesses get new products to market. And the bit that I do not want to forget is the sustainable procurement piece, because for sure, many businesses are doing great things on sustainability, absolutely. But I do slightly worry that it is a bit of a fad and that maybe we take an eye off the ball. And I firmly believe that as procurement, we have to make sure it's central to everything we do.
So should
Mm,
cost is a wonderful
mm,
topic. And most of the experts that I've worked with and talked to on should cost have identified that part of the cost is a fair margin, a fair
yeah,
profit for the
yeah.
supplier. And I know I've seen a few comments out there that needs to be minimized, except minimizing that leads to an unhealthy supplier, which leads to a weaker supply chain
Yeah.
overall, not a stronger one. And so I love that you were identifying and highlighting that's one of those things that it is part of the evaluation. It's not simply a nice to have for them, but immaterial for the buying organization. Is is there is there an example where you've had a conversation with somebody that helped them see a bit of an aha moment in how and why that's really important?
As in how the getting the right profit level is really important.
Yeah, how it's important to make sure that the supplier has a
Absolutely.
profit, because I think there are some that would come in, as you
Yeah.
said, and smack the table and say it costs too much.
Mm.
But there are also some that are hiding out there, and sometimes hiding in plain sight. Sometimes they're in the meeting and they're even not hiding
Mm.
anymore, that are of the opinion that a supplier is there to serve the company and that it's
Mm.
not a mutual relationship. There are times where I've seen a conversation in a room with
Mm.
a few different leaders, and the person that was advocating for winning at all costs or
Yeah.
just grinding the supplier on price
Mm.
being reminded that the supplier is actually pretty important for the success of that company,
Yeah.
because without those raw materials, it is, or input services, it is very difficult for that company to have the product that they need to sell. And I'm curious if you've seen an example or a story
Mm.
where that conversation was had within a buying organization in a
Mm.
way that reset the expectation that a strong set of suppliers will create the strength in that buying organization that they need.
Mm.
Similar to if it's a situation of droughts, of just a structural
Mm.
change, this is different
Mm.
from, I'll call it an attitude in the go-to-market.
Yeah, so look, it's fair to say over my career, I have seen moments when a particular individual has been unnecessarily aggressive and greedy. And I think it comes back to bite them because ultimately the supplier is assessing their client, their customer, just as the other way around. Fortunately, it is, when I say it's getting less, and of course we're in a commercial world, we are there to maximize the value of our businesses and clients. If I might almost take the conversation on and talk about sort of some of the things actually we should see differently and how we can go about it.
Yeah,
So,
please.
as a couple of examples, this year, I am looking to change for a client, or looking to look at new supply opportunities, should I say, in Asia, and looking at new suppliers we could tap into. I'm having very meaningful conversations with these suppliers, and I've literally asked them, what profit level do you need? And they've given me a number X. And I said, right, we're going to do everything possible to safeguard that number for you. And we're going to look at all the other costs, so the cost of materials, the cost of production, the cost of labour, etc., how everything except the profit. And I've been really, really impressed with this supplier. So they have given me their cost model, their should cost model, and it tallies with the model that I created already. And so I think they're being fair. Some of the products match, and so some we might be able to source them, and some they're over a bit. It means we can have a really good debate. So that's one example. And I've said to them that ultimately, if we can't end up in a place where we can get you that profit, you've got a choice. You could sell to us, but I feel uncomfortable, but that would be your choice. But at least we know up front. And then to create a mechanism that if the base materials change in price, that then we just change the kind of cost model every quarter to affect it. That's one. And a very interesting one also with the European company. While acting for a client, and it's fair to say this one truly showed that they were making too much money out of my client. Again, I have to say I was really impressed with this supplier because I shared the should cost model with them of what I thought they're making, and they said, "Look, fair cop. Your client was a smaller client to start with, so just kind of, if you like, taking more cost and effort to run. Now they've grown. It's been a good profit for us." And yes, your numbers are accurate, and we're prepared to. You found it out, and we're prepared to reduce our prices for them. And I thought that's quite good of them because they could have just denied it.
Yeah, I think that sense of openness and transparency, with the understanding and coming from a place of trust that there
Yeah,
is a goal of creating and reinforcing that stronger supply chain,
yeah,
is a really, really powerful outcome. And I think there's a few tools out there that take an automated approach not a more sophisticated should cost approach,
Yeah,
to do a digital equivalent of your price is too high, smack virtual table,
exactly,
and please reduce your price.
exactly.
And what in the absence of other conversation, it feels as if this is just a way to remove some of the discomfort of
Mm.
smacking the table, but rather automate that and having a little bot go out in there and do that on your behalf. As somebody who brings technology to market, this to me is an example of technology misapplied, because it's further removing and further separating the key partners in a supply chain from the meaningful conversations that are
Mm.
needed to make sure that the supply chain stays strong. I'm curious if you've seen some of that, and or what you've seen in the human element in the conversations that you're having, because they're not necessarily easy conversations.
Yeah.
And there's a discovery and a very pointed conversation. And I think the idea that humans not just need to be in the loop, but are integral to
Yeah.
maintaining a strong supply chain. This feels like one of those great examples of when, where, and how that still is very true.
Hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I'm happy to comment on it. I think with the right software and the right conversations, you can have both. I'm not here to do a sales pitch because I think that's wrong. It's much more about a conversation. If I am permitted to mention a partner company, am I permitted to mention a partner company I work with?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there is a great company called Mintech Expana, and they gather hundreds of thousands of data series from around the world, really focusing on food and drink, and they've got cost modeling capabilities. So that is definitely something that could be deployed. I think a company needs both. They both need a system like theirs, which has got really good transparent data, but it also needs the human touch, because like all these things, they can get very nuanced. And some of the cost modeling I do is very,
Yeah.
very particular. And you've got to ask, and you've alluded to it, you've got to ask the right questions that go with the cost models.
Yeah. And there's having the data set and some tools to help assemble the should cost
Yeah,
is one ingredient. Then there's the evaluation, the analysis of it, the sober second
yeah,
thought, the sanity check of
that's
that.
it.
And then there's the human conversation with the
That's
supplier
it.
that takes the discovery and seeks to arrive at
Yeah.
something that is a next generation of strong between those two organizations. And I think there's a whole set of ingredients. I know Tom has his procurement soft skills course, which
Yeah.
when we think about the approach that was common 20 years ago of just slap the table and raise your voice,
Mm.
this is pretty much the antithesis of the modern effective view of what good looks like in those spaces. I'm thinking about what fuels your passion for this portion of the supply chain, right? There is a subset of the supply chain. You're making it more sustainable, you're
Mm.
making it stronger, and you're helping to identify ways to bring new efficiencies in while strengthening those relationships.
Mm.
And this is a very, very challenging thing to do, that
Mm.
it takes a special set of ingredients to do. Where does your passion come from? What drives you
Mm.
in like the element of helping, supporting, training, coaching to create these outcomes? Because
Mm.
this is a hard thing, Simon. And for somebody to dedicate their life
Mm.
to doing a hard thing, it's got to
Mm.
come from in here.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, that some of the projects can get very difficult, but to say I find it easy, it's like what I do. It's like what I love doing. And so even if I'm on a tricky one, I'm like, I'm going to crack this somehow. I think it comes back to the word sustainable procurement, and I've got like I see sustainable in two lenses. I see it as ESG, so it's the whole good for the planet piece and good for people. But I see it as sustainable. Does it stand the test of time? So look, in theory, one can do tactical procurement. That is, what's the price today? I need it today. Or there's that long-term view is how do we set this up long-term? And that goes so much more than just cost. It starts with, have we got the right quality suppliers? Have we got the right specs? What's going on with all the materials upstream as they flow through? What's the production method as well? And then there's this piece about supply security, where you can't just kind of demand that you get product from a supplier. You've got to work with that supplier. You've got to work with the constraints of, are there constraints in the field? Are there constraints in the logistics? Are there constraints in the production capability? And so I get a massive buzz of making supply chains end to end work really, really well. And I help procurement teams give them that sort of creative thinking to go, right, how do we set this up for long-term success? And when that works, I'm a happy person because now I've got a happy client.
I love that. I love that. I'm curious, when you zoom out and you look at the state of procurement,
Yeah.
the industries and the portions of supply chain that you serve, what do we as procurement leaders, as procurement practitioners, really need to be focusing on?
Good point. But let's start with some positives first, and then we'll talk about where the focus areas needs to be. There's a couple of things that are going really well. If you go back again, sort of 10, 20, 30 years, procurement was definitely the core relative to other functions in the business. And you know what? Quite a bit of that was self-inflicted. We weren't good enough. But also, we weren't positioned to be good enough. We weren't recruiting the right people. We weren't being trained properly, what have you. And if you look at what's happened with the economic crash of 2008, look at in Europe, we had, certainly in the UK, we had the Brexit piece, which started testing us. Then we had kind of COVID, Ukraine. And we have really had to raise our game as procurement, like big time. And I have to say, I'm really proud of what the majority of procurement teams have done. I think we've shown what we can do. And I think we've helped our businesses mitigate a massive amount of risk. And I think through that process, we've learned a huge amount about how to do procurement better. And we should be very proud of that. I think the other thing that is coming, I mean, there's more work to do, but this is a positive, is that there wasn't enough focus on procurement systems. I think that goes right across the community. I know people like you were, pioneers and leaders in this space, but I'll be very open. I mean, I've been lagging in that space, but I think people like me are definitely kind of catching up and realizing how important the software is. And I've been so encouraged. I'm so happy that things like DPW, Digital Procurement World, has been created as a forum to capture that software and promote it. And I went last year, I was like, wow, this is amazing software. And I didn't even know it existed. And I have chats with a lot of people now. They don't even know DPW exists. This is mad. Yeah. And so I think it's a huge place where we can use systems to best effect. I think there are some gaps. I think it's fair to say, I see it a bit like this. It's like, what's next? What's next for procurement? Like, and what's coming down the line? One of the things I think we're sleepwalking into is that even though we've had things like COVID and Ukraine and what have you, which should be a reminder to us of how quickly things can go wrong and the impact they can have on us. I think we've taken our eye off the ball on supply security. I see too many businesses just back to it's okay, and they're on sole supply. It's like, it's not okay. There are going to be more shops coming down the road, and you see them from climate change, from crops failing, the geopolitical piece, the fact we're 8.3 billion people in the world. And my advice to people would be, don't wait for the next shop. Get yourself ready. So sole supplier, whether it's business continuity plans, there's different specs and these sort of things. And I think I've alluded to it earlier, but I think we've taken off the ball on sustainable procurement. I think it's a bit of a nice to have, and I think, as I said, I know some companies are doing great things, but when you scrape beneath the surface, there's quite a lot of chat, and it's not always matched by strong enough actions. And there's a third area. Should we just discuss training?
Yeah,
I'm going to put the question to you, and then we'll come back to you. From where you're sitting and the procurement people you meet, how well do you think they're trained?
Trained.
Trained. As in
trained. Do you mean thrown on the job and said, sink or swim, go?
Yes. I mean, if you think about all the things we've got to be good at, and I've got a strong view on this, I'll be open, but rather just me throwing out there, more people you meet, how well trained do you think the procurement professional is? And you can be very honest.
Yeah. Quite poorly, Simon. And in an organization that is primarily viewed as taking cost out, training budgets are often a nice to have.
Yeah.
When on top of that, I see teams that talk about training and learning and development as, oh, I got to go to XYZ procurement conference. This is not the same as training, but it is a professional development opportunity. And when I consider how much onboarding and orienteering, if you will, somebody gets in a new role in a procurement team.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, Simon, it's pretty light. And it's not just what matters and what's the category strategy, assuming one was defined recently and not simply a presentation or Word document in a SharePoint folder
Yeah.
from 4 years ago. But
Yeah.
I would look at what good looks like, and I can
Mm.
point to a few teams without naming names where there is regular training on what good looks like for negotiation, for soft
Mm.
skills, for the specific category and the topics that that team is covering, and
Yeah.
how to keep an eye out for the most important things that are changing in that
Yeah.
category, and then how to feed
Mm.
that quickly back to the category team. These are some of the
Mm.
things that I look at, even aside from some of the technology that many teams are stuck on technology that needs extensive training to be able to even create a
Mm.
requisition. Why am I putting a D in this box? I don't know. Because the guide said to put a D in. Because Ted told us to
Yeah.
do that 14 years,
Yeah.
right? And that kind of an example leaves a significant gap. And so we created even this
Yeah.
procurement curmudgeon as a caricature of the guy that's been there
Yeah.
long enough to know how it's supposed to be done, but not necessarily having been afforded the opportunity to go and make it better. And to your point, this opportunity to go and get to some of the enterprise risk management level of significant supply disruption,
Yeah.
this takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time, it takes capacity, and it takes an
Mm.
investment of that capacity towards the really important, but not the urgent. And so many procurement teams are stuck in that tyranny of the urgent.
Yeah.
So when you are stuck in a
Mm.
backlog being 100 requisitions or 100 POs behind or 1,000 behind where you want it to be from your service levels, this is darn near impossible to go and allocate the time that's needed to training. And there is a lot of folks out there, Simon, I think you've
Mm.
probably met some too, that would love to have and make that time, but their
Mm.
leaders aren't necessarily making the time for them, or the
Mm.
leader themselves is saying, I wish I could, but
Yeah.
I'm being held to task on X, Y, and Z, which
Yeah.
leaves no time for the A, B, and C really important things. And this kind of do or delegate or delete kind
Mm.
of view of the world, the autonomy to go and delete some of those tasks is
Mm.
not afforded to some of the procurement teams, which is, I think, one of the things that's holding them back.
What I'd like to do, if I may, because I know as a business you're doing some cool things on things like digital employee. Come back to that in a minute and ask you a second question, and Mo, about that, because that's exciting. Can I just
Yeah,
give you a view of how I see training
please.
and bounce to some of the things you said? What I really liked is you touched on this bit about just it starts with onboarding. So from the minute that person walks through the door, how well set are they? How well, if you like, supported they've been to get set up in their new job, and everything that they need to do that right through the life cycle as that person progresses through the organisation. Of course, there is training that happens. In Europe, we have the SIPS, Chartered Institute Procurement Supply Chain, that people typically do in the early part of their career, and great. I mean, I sometimes hear it's potentially some of it's a little bit dated, but I think they are upgrading it. But it's good. It's good. It exists. Most people seem to get trained in negotiation, which is a great thing. We all know it's a key skill. Apart from that, and I've done a big survey on this, and I come to that back for results in a minute. But the big other areas that people get trained in are personal effectiveness, again important. And if you move up through the organisation, you get leadership skills. My however bit is that when we did this survey, 43% of the people surveyed felt that their training was either below average or poor. That is not good. And what it came out to is that basically the training is one, it's way too narrow. So it's, to all intents and purposes, you're going to get negotiation training. You might get something else. It's too weighted on the people in the early part of their career, but of course, as you progress up through your career, there's so many more things that you've got to learn, and there's massive gaps. So there's gaps in things like being trained in cost modeling, and that's something I end up training a lot. Being trained in supply security, like it's not automatic. You know how to do it. Someone's got to show you how to go and secure supply. And some of it can get quite quite nuanced. Sustainable procurement, like who's training how to do sustainable procurement? Who's training in systems? It's not just we have a new MRP system, here's how to use it. It's okay, what's all the procurement systems out there? What's the architecture that we need? How do we get ourselves set up for the future? And I think businesses need to invest, and not just money, because it's not just a money thing. It's thought about how they're going to go and train their teams, what all the competencies they need. And what's been fascinating is, and you might have spotted on my LinkedIn recently. I've been doing a lot on training competencies for procurement, and they fly. And that the ecosystem's telling me something is that they're hungry for this stuff.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You'd done something on LinkedIn recently about cost savings versus cost avoidance.
Yeah.
And even just being able to articulate the difference
Mm.
and help track that difference.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear a little bit about what you saw that
Yeah.
really touched people that had
Mm.
that particular post do so well.
And I will answer that. I'd just like to come back to one thing, if I may, because I'm
Yeah.
interested in this, is that I know you're doing this great work of kind of digital employee and taking away transactional work that we shouldn't be doing. And for
Yes.
me, that's very interesting because in my mind, it's a real positive thing and we shouldn't be worried about it, which is that the typical procurement professional's got a massive job. We do not want to be encumbered with boring transactional work that doesn't add value if it can be automated. We want to be on the big ticket stuff because we've got these big jobs of how do we secure supply, how do we bring products to market. What is it that your business is doing to help the procurement professional focus on the big ticket things and not get encumbered with the dross, the transactional stuff?
So what I would summarize is a cheeky answer, Simon, as we're
Okay.
be making procurement awesome. I think to build on that with a little bit more detail, though, there's so much work that procurement teams get sucked into. And in many cases,
Yeah.
it's the time that's lost being dragged into payment issues and
Yeah.
invoicing. And so one of the areas that we tackled really, really aggressively was invoice
Yeah.
automation to make sure that the tail is not wagging the dog. And so getting to
Yeah.
99% accuracy and even like 85% touchless within a few weeks of implementation for organizations to
Yeah.
just automate the invoicing, right? And this takes through
Yeah.
inching, et cetera. And then from there, coming back up
Yeah.
through the procure to pay and automating those transactions for
Yeah.
advanced service entry sheets and field tickets, and then the goods
Yeah.
receipts and helping with helping support automation around inventory, the purchase order
Yeah.
confirmations, because sometimes somebody asks for 10 tons of coffee beans and they say, well, I can't do 10
Yeah.
tons on that date, but I can do 5 tons this date, 5 tons the other date, and automating that to make sure that that stays in tight sync. And then coming upstream, you've got that intake and orchestration capability layered all the way across the top,
Mhm.
right from the initial intake,
Yeah.
come through sourcing, contracting, more advanced steps through the category team, or even just pass it through, make sure we're pulling the right out of a catalog, so you don't need to touch contracting or sourcing, get into the procure to pay flow. That's really the
Mhm.
space that we play in. And so Rio is basically a digital sidekick, if you will, a digital intern to
Yeah.
help be that tool. It is absolutely based around this AI and agentic. However, it is not based on building a legion of
Mhm.
agents that are going to go out and work for you. If you've ever seen the movie Despicable Me and these little yellow minions, the context and intelligence and readiness of most pure play agents today
Yeah.
are about equivalent to a minion, right? Well
Okay.
intentioned, but
Okay.
sometimes they say things that make no sense.
Yeah.
And if left to run amok, they can
Mhm.
certainly make a mess.
Yeah.
So we have strategically created the capability to, take insight from the agentic technology, but
Yeah.
don't let it run amok. And
Okay.
the whole system is designed to run on rails that
Yeah.
meet that 99.99 minimum percent
Yeah.
reliability that organizations need. So that's where I think this digital employee, don't misunderstand. There are teams and organizations out there talking about agents that are going to run the
Mhm.
whole company. And there's this great expectations. This was actually, speaking of DPW, part of the presentation that I shared was this idea that, there's such high, great expectations from the executive, from the board, that, procurement leaders are going to be able to run this legion of 50 agents that are going to do the work of 50 people with 5. Except that that's not what's really happening. And the ones
Yeah.
that have tried end up with a room full of minions making a mess, not the sort of
Yeah.
efficiency that they're looking for. So there is a march
Mhm.
towards greater and greater and greater capability from AI.
Mhm.
But to have a digital team member,
Mhm.
you need to be able to rely on them.
Yeah.
And you today will struggle to get a reliable answer from what some technologists would call a pure play agent that
Mm.
self-solves and loops through its own logic.
Mm.
Mathematically, for those of you that are mathematically inclined, if you can imagine something that's maybe 90% accurate to go do a task on its first round, some of the agentic processing loops through the same logic and over and over and over again. So if you take, 90 to, 6 or 10 or 12 steps,
Yeah.
then by the time you've gotten through 12 steps, you're nowhere near 90% accurate. And I
Mm.
think that's really the trap that some teams are falling into, is they're trying to
Mm.
chase something that's not ready yet. And
Mm.
so there's a whole other set of ways to go and use agentic technology to go more quickly generate the rails and rules that supply chain and procurement teams can run on. But that's how we're approaching it, very differently
Mm.
from others.
And Sean, I have to say, I appreciate your honesty there because, clearly you're assistant pro and I'm someone who's kind of learning about this stuff. And it's all very easy to see something that's new and shiny and promoted. It's going to, take out, huge amounts of resource and make our life easier. And actually, I'm sure it's making vast strides forward, but, it would be naive to think it's going to crack everything. And your pragmatic view there is great. But I think when I hear about things like, invoice matching to PO and stuff, and where it can be automated, and uploads of lots of data, data and documents and stuff. I mean, great, push on with that because ultimately that frees us up to
Yeah.
to do the big things.
Yeah, and I think that's really the sweet spot for automation, is there are things that are taking a
Mm.
tremendous amount of time and they're highly repetitive. Those are the
Yeah.
things to automate. And I would implore anybody, as I
Mm.
often do, please don't ever place a pure agent in charge of three-way matching. This is a recipe for some very
Yeah.
unhappy auditors very quickly. And that doesn't mean that there
Yeah.
isn't space for that agentic kind of capability in and around that process. But just please do
Yeah.
not three-way match with the agent.
Mm.
This to
I get
say
it.
not ready would be an understatement, Simon.
Mm. And look, I mean, I'm actually very open, and I hope the rest of the procurement community are as well, in terms of things that make our life easier and quicker and what have you. Um, not, and we should embrace technology when it is able to do that. People will still
Yes.
want to buy people. It's still that just deep-rooted piece of, I need to sit in a room, I need to have coffee with them, I need to chat through it with that instantaneous kind of conversation and just picking up the soft cues. And I'm not sure that will ever go away.
Yes.
It'll just change. And hopefully actually free us up for more time to do that, because if we're not encumbered with the transactional stuff, we can actually kind of really
Yeah,
invest in that
and
sort of
and
thing.
I look at the
Mm.
should cost work that you do, and I would
Mm.
encourage anybody that's saying they have an agent that will build your should cost for you is probably in that 90% that becomes 15, 30% very quickly. But what is possible is to create a first draft that is 90% maybe, or even only
Correct.
60% correct, but then get you all of the work that it took to assemble and structure the initial portion of it.
Yeah.
That sometimes it takes a while to go and gather all of
Mm.
that. And then create the framework where you can add and tune and edit to take it that next port. Then you get it to 90%. Then you can go have a conversation with the supplier about it. But again, the space and the time that I would invite somebody or encourage somebody to trust an agent to go do that today is somewhat narrower so far.
And this is it. So I mean, if I use an example to demonstrate it, I do a lot of work on tuna, both for human grade and for pet food. And the cost model for tuna, you might think it's really simple. It's actually extremely
I imagine.
complicated, because you have a tuna fish, if you like, comes in at one end, and to the novice they would go, well, how much usable meat is there? Okay, there's 50%, and the rest is waste. It doesn't
No.
work like that at all. Every single part of that tuna gets used for something, from the best loin through to the flakes, through to the bone, the collagen, the eyes, the head. And you've got to understand all those different elements to do the cost model. Otherwise, your model will be
Yeah.
totally and utterly wrong. In theory, maybe there is a system that could crack that. I haven't seen it yet. It's taken me to get it really, 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 really right.
Yeah.
It's taken me
Oh, I
years.
love it. This is
Yeah.
where the experience and the depth of expertise in very specific pieces is going to continue to be the
Mm.
human's edge over the AI. And it's where you can use AI to
Yeah.
help you, or use technology, even if it's not AI specifically, but use
Exactly.
technology to help you get your work done faster. An Excel spreadsheet to me is one of my
Mm.
favorite examples of technology that I imagine most procurement teams still run on, regardless of what larger enterprise system they may have
Yeah,
bought. And I think this will continue for some time. And I think
yeah,
the idea that we actively fight that is optimistic, to put it mildly, because each individual, to the extent that they're going to bring their own creativity, and to the extent that they may or may not have been trained on a more sophisticated model. And even if you take the fresh new junior and you try to train them on the very
yeah.
advanced model, they may still only understand part of it because they don't yet have
So,
something to reference or connect with for some of those other components in your tuna fish model, as an example.
mm. And
Uh,
triangulate, as you said, so it's that triangulation piece. I'm conscious we have had the most fantastic red herring here between us, which is actually a good thing, because I think spontaneous is really good. But there's that question which you posed me, which we should come back to, which is that
yeah,
about cost savings versus cost avoidance.
please.
And I know you spotted it and called it out. So for those listening, I did a post on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and it absolutely flew. And it was this bit about cost savings versus cost avoidance. It is a classic topic, and I think you asked me like, why did it fly? Like, what's sort of the bang? Go back again. I sort of reference this quite a bit, but I think there is a new world we're in. But if you go back to sort of the old world, it's not that material prices and markets weren't changing. Of course they were, but simply the degree of change was less, and the speed at which it changed was less. So, I mean, if you take a classic example, I do a huge amount of packaging as well. I buy a lot of glass for jars and bottles and that sort of thing for companies. And basically, no one was really looking at glass up until about 5 years ago because it was cheap and the price was stable. Come the massive gas crisis we had in Europe several years ago, and because glass needs a huge amount of gas to make it, the price of glass went absolutely crazy. It would be like being on the lowlands of South America or India and suddenly hitting the Andes or the Himalayas. It went that crazy.
Wow.
And the question is, if you're buying glass, how do you see success? Because in the old days, I just make these numbers up. Let's say the glass cost 1,000, doesn't matter, dollars per ton, whatever, and that you then got it to 970. It's a very clear, 1,000 to 970, $30 a ton saving. But when the markets go crazy, well, how do you gauge success in a rising market? And equally, how do you gauge it in a falling market? So, in my view, in a rising market, if you are able to take if you like, the top of that mountain, the top of the peak, then procurement should be recognised for that. There are some folk in business who don't see that as value. And my response to them is, okay, fine, if you don't see it as value, we won't do it. We won't do cost avoidance. And the minute you say that, it is amazing how quickly the tide turns. Where those people, oh, no, we didn't mean that. No, please go and do it. So, oh, it's valuable, is it? Yes, it's very valuable. Okay, well, if it's very valuable to you, we need to be recognised for it. Equally, when the market starts falling, our job is to, as a minimum, make sure that the finished prices fall in line with the market, because there can be a temptation for there to be a lag and the supply prices to drop much slower than what the market's falling.
Yeah.
And again, we should be recognised for that. Why the post caused so much energy was, I think, because the procurement profession just wants to be recognised for cost avoidance as well. Now, it must be done properly. So it must be done with a really clear datum. It must be done with really clear rules agreed with the finance team. It must be tracked and calculated properly. I think so long as that's done, and of course it is different. I mean, it still hits the bottom line, but it's different. The cost avoidance, cost saving, both important. They're just different.
I love it, Simon. And I know from our conversation today, it's pretty clear that you've got a set of expertise that folks should reach out to you for. What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you, Simon?
Sure. So it ranges. Obviously, some people just message me directly through LinkedIn. Some people email me. I absolutely love receiving calls. And often the calls, they might not end in a sale. It doesn't matter. Like, I have some great chats with people from all around the world about just things they want help with, and topics they're interested in. And that's what makes my job fun.
That's amazing. Simon, grateful for you spending today with us, and really appreciate watching you on your never-ending climb, helping strengthen our world's food supply chain. And for everybody out there watching, thank you very much for joining us. This has been another edition of The Never-Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement from New York City. Thanks, everyone. See you next
Thank
week.
you. Bye bye.